And with me now in the studio is the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull. Prime Minister, congratulations on your elevation to the position.
Thank you. Good evening.
Given that you cited 30 poor news polls in a row as one of the reasons for removing the previous Prime Minister, can we agree that we are never going to hear you on this program as Prime Minister say that the only poll that matters is the one on election day?
I've only ever said that. Well, I've only ever said that somewhat tongue-in-cheek. You know, it's like one of those things that every politician says. Well, many politicians say, "Oh, we don't look at the opinion polls." Nobody looks at opinion polls
now we do.
with
now we
more
know you do.
attention than politicians. But of
Excellent,
course, you've got to remember
that.
a single poll is a snapshot in time. But
well, look, let's start with something more significant than that, which is something very fundamental, and go back to first principles. What are the values and core beliefs that will be the foundation for all of the policies that your government comes up with?
Well, this is a Liberal national government. It is a free market government. It is committed to ensuring that Australians are free to choose their own directions, whether it's in their business or their profession or their families. So they've got to. So freedom is the key point. I mean, it's perhaps a bit simplistic, but one way you can say it, you can describe it, is that the Liberal Party, and I can make the same point about the National Party too, our coalition partners, we believe that government's job is to enable you to do your best. Labor, which has more faith in government, believes that government's job is to tell you what is best. So that's a fundamental thing. But there are some very key priorities, Lee, right now. One of them, principally, is we have to ensure that we remain a high-wage, first-world, generous social welfare net economy, and that requires strong economic growth. How do we maintain that? Well, there's a big, expanding global economy with many more avenues for Australian services and exports and manufacturers and primary products, and all of that's very exciting. But we need to be competitive, we need to be productive, we need, above all, to be more innovative. Okay. So that is a critically important point.
So with that point then, to take the economy against, and I want this discussion to be against that backdrop you've just laid out there, that your principles are free market, free individual, lean government. Would you consider using the mid-year economic forecast in December for a mini budget?
Well, it's not something I have considered. We've only had our first cabinet meet. Cabinet was just only sworn in today, and we've just had our first cabinet meeting. But we're obviously considering, all of our economic responses, and it is absolutely critical that we provide strong economic leadership, and above all, confidence. I mean, it's not just the measures. If you talk to Glenn Stevens, the Reserve Bank Governor, and this is what he says everywhere. He certainly said it to me in recent times, that one of the missing ingredients at the moment in our economy is confidence. That's to say, there isn't enough confidence. So government has to provide the leadership, the sense that we know what we're doing, that we have a vision, we have a clear direction, and that builds up business confidence. I mean, interest rates have never been lower, so it's a fair question to say, why is business not investing more? And the answer is lack of confidence. So everything I can say to inspire confidence is going to help the economy.
But even if you, have an optimistic and a hopeful message about opportunity versus, say, Tony Abbott's message about Labor's debt and deficit legacy and a budget emergency and so on, isn't the reality that you've got exactly the same underlying conditions? You've got anemic growth, you've got stubborn unemployment, you've got increasing demands on government spending, slowing Chinese growth, a growing deficit, and so on. So what's going to happen?
I'm not agreeing with all of that list, by the way. But anyway.
Well, you've got this backdrop of an economy that is not performing at top note. So what's going to happen if in 6 months' time, 6 months of Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, we're still in the same situation, or perhaps the economy may have even worsened by then?
Well, Lee, for a start, the economy is not in bad shape. We obviously would like to have stronger economic growth, and that is our goal to deliver it. But you've got to remember that we had a big mining construction boom. Terms of trade doubled. Inevitably, there was great demand for Australian commodities, iron ore and coal in particular. A lot of investment that fueled up the economy. Mining investment went up to over 8% of the economy. It's normally too. So there was a massive mining construction boom that's come off now. And what is very impressive is the way the economy has reacted. The automatic stabilisers, such as the exchange rate in particular, are providing a lot of cushioning against that shock. Normally, we have a real economic crisis. In the past, we've had, when I say normally, in years past.
Yet there's
so
still
the
not
system
confidence.
is working. Well, I think that is there are many explanations for that. But one of the things I can do as Prime Minister and my government can do is to provide the leadership and the confidence, and you do that not by just talking in an airy-fairy way. You've got to actually lay out the facts. You've got to describe the situation as it stands. And so,
well, you've got to introduce some reforms.
Yes, indeed.
So on that point, let me ask you, will you consider expanding the base and the rate of the GST?
Well, we're considering tax reform is going to be a big part of our reform agenda going forward. That's why we've brought the tax minister, the assistant treasurer, Kelly O'Dwyer, into the cabinet.
And is everything on the table?
Well, I'm not going to rule things in or rule things out. This is one of the Canberra games. One of the things I'm trying to do is to change the paradigm so that it's a more rational one. Because you get into this crazy situation where politicians are, backed up by journalists or their opponents say, rule this in, rule that out, rule this in, rule that out. Or they're asked to say, will you guarantee that this policy will work? And the truth of the matter is that when you're considering reform, you've got to be prepared to consider all of the advice that you receive. I mean, there are practical limits as to what you would do, but the important thing is to be open-minded, consult, engage intelligently, explain the challenges to the public in a manner that respects their intelligence, and then make a decision. And having made a decision, then argue, advocate, in other words, why your decision is right.
On the point you make about confidence, one of the things that has perhaps stymied business confidence is industrial relations, and they have been wanting small business and large businesses' industrial relations reform. You said in 2011, after Qantas grounded its fleet, that there should be maximum freedom and flexibility in the workplace. That also fits with the core principles you outlined before. I don't think we should be frightened by the work choices bogey. Given that, what then is your first priority in industrial relations reform?
Well, the industrial relations reform, which is basically labour market reform, has been a very vexed one. It's been it's obviously been a pitched battle in some respects between the government and the unions and business and the unions. I think the important thing is to seek to explore ways in which we can achieve more flexibility, higher levels of employment, higher levels of business activity, and do so in a way that reassures Australian workers in particular, that this is not threatening their conditions. In other words, the challenge for us is not to wage war with unions or the workers that they seek to represent, but really to explain what the challenges are and then lay out some reform options. Now, as to specifics, well, we're a cabinet government, so specific policies will be resolved by the cabinet, and in any event, we're barely a week old.
Let's turn to foreign and defence policy. What do you currently consider to be the greatest threat to global security? Well,
look, you probably can't really rank them because they are very difficult. I mean, clearly the threat of terrorism, if you like, militant Islamist terrorist groups like Daesh in the Middle East, and its various affiliates around the world, Al Qaeda. That is clearly that's clearly a big threat. I think in terms of our region, what we need to ensure is that the rise of China, which is happening, it's nothing's going to stop that in any time soon, is if you like, conducted in a manner that does not disturb the security and the relative harmony of the region upon which China's prosperity depends. Now that requires careful diplomacy. It requires balancing, and it's an issue, as you know, I've taken a very key and interest in.
Have you been concerned about, for example, China's territorial ambitions in the South China Sea?
Yes, I think it's been, and I've said this publicly many times, I think it's been one of the more counterproductive foreign policies undertaken by China. If you go back to the early 2000s, China took a different approach to border disputes particularly with Russia. There's a very good example where they settled outstanding border disputes and just resolved them. The pushing the envelope in the South China Sea has had the consequence of exactly the reverse consequence of what China would seek to achieve. You would think that what China would seek to achieve is to create a sufficient feeling of trust and confidence among its neighbours that they no longer felt the need to have the US fleet and a strong US presence in the Western Pacific. Now, what the island construction and all of the activity in the South China Sea has done has resulted in the smaller countries surrounding that area turning to the United States as even more than they did before. I mean, Vietnam, for example, which obviously has had a very different history of the United States, is now seeking its support. So I think their foreign policy in the South China Sea has been quite counterproductive. And
if you see then, say, the rise of China and how that would be managed as the biggest regional issue for security, and then more broadly you see terrorism, we've got a defence white paper coming out soon. What is your view then about the role of Australia's defence force and how Australia's defence force needs to be positioned to deal with those sorts of threats?
Well, our defence force has to, and this is not a revelation, Lee, our defence forces have to be able to play a role in a range of different potential conflict situations, but we're not seeking to I don't want to no one, least of all the Australian government, wants to exacerbate the situations. We have very good relations with all of our neighbours, including China, but there clearly are some tensions with the islands in the South China Sea, in particular, with the reefs, I should say, and shoals in the South China Sea. And my own view and the government's view is that China would be better advised in its own interests, frankly, to not to be pushing the envelope there, and that is why there's been resistance against that activity.
All right, let's try to whip around a few other things, again,
Sure.
against this backdrop of your first principles that you've outlined. Given that you say that you are a believer in the free market, lean government and so on, why do you support sticking with a direct action plan on climate change, which is a massive government intervention, rather than a market-based mechanism?
Well, look, it works, Lee. The real objective of climate change policy is to cut your emissions. And there are many different roads you can go down.
Why not go down with one, though, that actually matches your first principles and is a market-based?
No, but just hang on. The object of climate policy is to reduce your emissions. There are many different ways you can do that. You can do that by regulation. You can do that by putting a fixed price on carbon, a carbon tax. You can do it by an emissions trading scheme. You can do it by a series of measures which people describe as direct action, but in truth what Greg Hunt has set up is an emissions reduction fund. It's capped. It has been very successful so far. It has reduced it's cut about 47 million tonnes of emissions at a price of less than $14 a tonne. So the fact is that what Greg has designed is a set of measures that he and we are confident will be able to reduce our emissions at the rate we're proposing at a very manageable cost. Now, the answer is what's good about the emissions reduction fund and the other mechanisms the government has in place. What's good about them is they're working. So, we're not looking for theoretical or economic theoretical purity here. We're looking for practical measures that work, and there's no doubt that all of the advice we have suggests that the government's policies will achieve the reductions that we're taking to the Paris Conference of the Parties.
As we all know, your first stint as Liberal leader didn't end well. What did you learn from, maybe it did now, but what did you learn from that experience that you will do differently this time?
Well, that's a good question, and there are many things. The answer is I've learnt many, many things. You know, you don't learn a lot from success. You learn, if you can survive setbacks, and political setbacks are the hardest because it occurs, you know, on the public stage. It is, if an experience like that, it either makes you or it breaks you, and you can come out of that sort of reforged, you know, regalvanised as a wiser, better person.
And what are you wiser about?
I'm wiser about people. I'm not great at analysing myself, to be honest. I don't find myself particularly interesting, so I don't analyse myself. But I feel much more confident and centred in myself. I feel, but not in a sort of ebullient way. I just feel quietly confident and settled. I'm at peace with myself, and I feel that the leadership I can provide to Australia will make a difference. I believe the leadership I can provide with my colleagues in this Parliament will ensure that we are better able to meet the challenges of the future and take advantage of those opportunities.
Let me ask you a bit of a personal question, and I don't mean it to be offensive in any way. Life has dealt...
That means it probably will be a bit
probably
offensive.
Will be a bit.
It's a little bit offensive, yeah.
Life has dealt you some great cards that few people get, right? You've got a great brain, everyone would agree, good parents, good health, lovely family, good education, enormous wealth. What do you say to Australians who might think, well, how can Malcolm understand what it is to struggle for anything? Because Malcolm's had everything that he's ever wanted.
Well, it's the truth is I have been extraordinarily lucky. I have had to struggle in my life. I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth by any means. But you know, the reality is that even if you're born with brains, you know, with higher intelligence, higher than average intelligence, that is as, in a sense, as undeserved as somebody who inherits $1 billion. The fact is, we've all got to recognise that much of our good fortune is actually good fortune. Of course, you work hard. Look, I'll give you an example. I remember when I was a partner of Goldman Sachs in New York, you know, very successful investment bank. Everyone was earning very big money. The chairman, the chief executive of the firm, gave a sort of pep talk to the partners, and he said, you know, we're doing well, we're making lots of money because we work hard, and we deserve it. And I said to him afterwards, just quietly, I said, you know, there are taxi drivers in this city that work much longer hours than anyone does here, and they don't earn very much at all. So the truth is, we don't really deserve our good fortune, and that's why if you do well, you've got to give something back. That's why I encourage people to be generous. That's why I encourage and practice philanthropy. And in terms of understanding the situation of others, all of us are different, right? So the truth is, nobody can have experienced exactly the same experience of any other Australian. The important thing is to have the emotional intelligence and the empathy and the imagination that enables you to walk in somebody else's shoes, to be able to sit down with them on a train or, you know, in the street, hear their story, and have the imagination to understand how they feel. Emotional intelligence is probably the most important asset certainly for anyone in my line of work.
Well, it's also something that's very relevant close to home for you at the moment, because you have 44 people in your own party room who are feeling pretty hurt and angry over Tony Abbott being dumped last week. What do you say to them in terms of... Yeah. No, there is hurt and anger there. Well, what do you say to them in terms of why they should show you loyalty?
Well, look, these leadership tussles always do, you know, there is always some leftover, you know, dissatisfaction. But the fact is, we're a team, and every now and then there is a difference of opinion as to who should be the leader of the team. That gets resolved, and then you have to move on and you know, support. The team's got to be cohesive. So I think the critical thing is working together. Pardon?
They've got to move on.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying that they have got to move on. I think the fact is, it is my job, above all, to make sure that everybody, whether they supported me or not, however they feel about it, they've got to feel that they are we're all part of the team. Now, the Liberal Party has many flaws, I'm sure, but it has got a couple of great virtues. It is the largest grassroots political movement in Australia. It is not run by any unions or big businesses or factions. It is a big grassroots party. Our party room members do not come from one professional political class like most of Labor's do. They come from every conceivable occupation, as you know. So we're a very individualistic party. And I think it's also a party with wide ranges of opinions on a range of issues. People talk, it goes from liberal to conservative. The truth is that all of us are a bit liberal and a bit conservative in differing degrees. So the most important thing is respect for your colleagues. And look, something, you asked me what I've learnt from my previous incarnation as leader. I think I've learnt, I know I've learned to be more respectful and to recognise more than I used to. I've always recognised, but to recognise more than I used to, that there is so much wisdom to be found among others, and that is your colleagues, or that is other people. That's why I'm committed to be extremely consultative, because you know something. There are very few propositions or ideas that are not improved by engaging with others.
You're not at the dispatch box and you're not at the bar, so I've got to squeeze in one more question before we run out of time. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to be rude like that too.
Not being rude at all.
No, I did cut you directly off.
That's fine.
One quick question before we go. Where do you intend to live in Sydney, in your residence or at Kirribilli?
Well, Lucy and I will continue to live, that's to say, sleep in our house in Sydney, which of course is agreeably close to our grandson. But Kirribilli House, as you know, has been used by Prime Ministers, and we'll obviously use that for official entertaining, and it's very valuable. It's a great location to use for charities and for opportunities to support good causes. So we'll certainly be doing that, but we'll be sleeping at home.
We are really out of time now, Prime Minister. Thank you very much for coming in this evening.